Happening now, we want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good evening. It is August 24th, 2017. My name is Jason Neifer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And I am joining you from rainy Missoula tonight. So we've had some moisture in the past 4 or 5 hours, and at one point it was dropping pretty hard. So the good news is that that should help out with many wildfires in forest across western Montana. Although I did hear from some members of my family that South Helena, which is about a 2 or so hour drive from Missoula, experienced some apparently lightning-caused fires tonight in the South Hills of Missoula. So Montana continues to burn. So that's the news from, I guess, Lake Missoulagan, and the exciting things going on here. And joining me tonight, as always, is Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes.
Good evening from Oklahoma City, where we have been sending many prayers for rain north, and so I'm glad to hear those have been answered. We have had some exciting weather. We had a real deluge just a couple nights ago. I photographed the clearest wall cloud drop out of a cloud just north of our school, and thankfully there was not a tornadic following. But yeah, it's exciting to be back at school and looking forward, I think, to the normalcy of the school year starting and the newness wearing off, which that will happen soon. So.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, yeah. Well, so where should we start tonight, sir?
Well, I don't know. We could talk about Google. Google announced a new operating system, right? Oreo.
It did. That's correct. On Monday during the eclipse shenanigans, and actually, Wes, I have to say, your photos of the shadows created by the solar eclipse were some of my favorite, and I wish I'd thought to look down that day as opposed to looking up, because especially in where I was, which wasn't near prime time, it was, and we had about 91% coverage, which, you know, is definitely something interesting to look at. And I did spend some time in my scientifically proven glasses looking up at the sky and kind of marveling at it all. But during that time, Google announced that Android O, which is the newest version of their operating system, Android, it's the version 8.0, finally has a name. For those of you that are unaware of how Android works, since Android started, they've adopted a letter that they then turn into a dessert. So there's been Android ice cream sandwich, and Android jelly bean, and Android Kit Kat, and Android nougat. And currently marshmallow, I'm sorry, that nougat's the current one, marshmallow was the previous one. And then Android O has been suspected all this time to be Android Oreo, or Android Orange Slice was the other one of them, but Android Oreo was announced on Monday. And it's really interesting. In fact, we've got a couple articles tonight that I think would be worth talking about in regards to phones and operating systems, and also viability of a phone long term. But the very bottom line is that Android O will bring many new features to the few phones that get Android O. And the phones right now that are ready to go with Android O include the Nexus Pixel phone. I'm sorry, not the Nexus Pixel phone, the Google Pixel phone, which is 2 varieties of phones released in 2016. And then there are 2 2015 phones, the Nexus, I think it's 6P and 5X is the name of the model numbers, that will receive Android O in a rolling rollout of that operating system. And it brings a lot of interesting new features. It also has a number of tweaks on things like battery life, and an attempt to make it even a more functional operating system. So I guess I should start with, I believe, Wes, that you are an entirely Apple family. Is that true of your phone still?
It is for our phones, yes. I did buy a Nexus 7 tablet, I guess, about maybe 3 years ago, or 4 years, something like that. So I've dabbled a little bit, but yeah, this is the reason this is interesting to me is we've been using some Android-based digital signage players at school, and our staff member who is primarily responsible for that has lamented that it is on Android 4.4. and evidently, and there's a special build that we're using for that. And anyway, from a security standpoint, that's not great, because what number is Oreo? Is it like 9 or is it 8? Do you know what?
It's Oreo's 8.
It is 8. Okay. So yeah, so we're, we are behind, and it's interesting as far as the way in which the Android ecosystem is fractured and the difficulty with which Google has in terms of people upgrading, and that's a complex thing, and I think it probably speaks as far as the control of your hardware, with Apple controlling their hardware, and just a different ecosystem. But the article that's in there from August 21st, which is Eclipse Day, is from Mac Rumors, and they've got a graph down there at the bottom of the article showing the fractured nature of the Android ecosystem. And so we've got, somewhere around a third running Marshmallow, a third Lollipop, and then the other third, divided between Kit Kat, Jelly Bean, Ice Cream Sandwich, Gingerbread, and Nougat. So
Right.
It's interesting. I think the reliability that we have, for instance, with AirPlay at school is phenomenal. We're having more and more teachers, using an Apple TV. We're working on our network as far as bandwidth and increasing, density for access points and things like that. But by and large, it's been rock solid. And my wife, who's started her second day today in the third grade classroom, new classroom at our school, was just commenting how she was loving, just being able to be anywhere in the room, on the floor, as far as with her kids reading in the laptop. And one of our first grade teachers was doing that too. So anyway, it's good to see Android continuing to move forward. We need to have choices. I definitely am not promoting a monopolistic landscape for computing, but I do think that Android continues to lag in some of the features that they talk about here, with picture-in-picture support and notification dots and some of this other stuff. I mean, it just kind of seems like they're chasing Apple a little bit. So,
Right.
That's
Well,
my take.
and I think part of it too is that the great thing about the Apple versus Google fight here in regards to mobile operating systems is they are pushing each other a lot. And in fact, one of the things I think has been really great is that I think both operating systems are basically functionally equal, and they keep adopting things that appear in the other operating system after a generation or two. For example, notifications are infinitely better on iOS devices now because Android's pushed them in the right direction in regards to how to do, pull down notification shades and then make those notifications as rich as possible. And so I think that's an extremely good piece of news. This news to me is really great news, except for two problems. The one of them, and to be clear, I'm an Android phone user. I have been now for 4 years, and I'm very happy on the Android operating system. But I'll give you an example of where I won't get Android O on either of the two phones that I have available to me. One of them is, this is a 3-year-old Galaxy Note 4, and the reason why I have this is because I bought it used. It was dirt cheap. The reason why I wanted this is because when I travel, I like to utilize a big, thick battery pack on it, and this is the last generation of Galaxy Note phone that has a removable battery, which means that I can purchase, or I have purchased a case from an outfit called Zero Lemon that built these really ridiculous brick cases that, increase the size and weight of it, but it also means the battery lasts for 3 days. So when I'm traveling, I don't use it at home. Obviously, I use my nice Svelte case when I'm at home. But when I'm traveling, I like to utilize a big, thick battery because that becomes kind of my center. I use it for hotspot tethering. Obviously, use it as a phone, as a communication device. And when I'm traveling in particular, I don't have as much access to to charging. So
that's a 10,000 milliamp extended battery.
Yeah.
When I looked up for the Note 3, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's bigger than most even premium laptop batteries, and you probably see the pictures on there that the Zero Limit battery is ridiculous. Like, it turns the phone into a brick, and I have.
But on an airplane, that's maybe ideal.
Yeah, exactly, and because it lasts forever basically, and that's sad to me. This doesn't even have the newest version. It doesn't have 7.0 Nougat. This has 6.0 Marshmallow. And again, it's good enough, and I don't have any problems with it. And although I love all the new features in Android Nougat and Android Oreo, the bottom line is that I won't get access to those unless I update phones. And what's interesting is that Android is part of a larger group of manufacturers of phones. Google's a member of this, Samsung is a member of this, LG is a member of this, Lenovo, which makes the Motorola phones now, is a member of this. It's the Open Handset Alliance, and one of the things they do is they promise that they'll do 2 years of updates after a phone is released. And I just don't think 2 years of updates is enough. Like, one of the things I think Apple has done that's very admirable is that the latest versions of iOS are available back to, I believe it's the iPhone 5, which means that we're talking about quite some time since those devices have been out. And although they don't always get the new features, Apple is happy to provide an updated version of that operating system 4 or 5 years afterwards. And part of that's because Apple's famous for building really hardy hardware, right? Like they have great build quality. So physically, laptops, desktops, phones, tablets last for a very long time. But, when you're talking about a premium phone, and obviously I purchased this one used and not free, but this was a premium phone in its time. It probably retailed at $600, $700, $800 if you bought it just off the shelf, unlocked. And the bottom line is that this phone is a perfectly good phone, right? There's nothing wrong with this. It's fast enough that it has a changeable battery, so I'm able to purchase a brand new battery from Amazon and refresh the battery. And I'm a power user, and this phone works just fine for me. And I think that we need to start having an ongoing conversation about, how is it that we can have computers last, right? Like, have the technology we've purchased, especially when we invest in a premium hardware, how do we make this last over time? And that's where I feel a little sad when Android O is released and it's available now for phones for just the past 2 years that Google has put out. I know that's never going to make it to my phone, which is a 3-year-old Android phone. And considering the retail price of this 3 years ago, I think it's perfectly legitimate for phone manufacturers to continue for 3, 4, 5, even 6 years after they're released.
Hey, we spoke of eclipses. If you could move your microphone just a little bit to one side, as you sit back, there's almost a complete microphone eclipse in terms of being able to see you. So I don't know if that's possible, but I bet that would do a little side mic action.
How's that?
That's excellent. Yes.
So
hiding behind the mic. Hey, can you see me, by the way? Peggy said I was looking like pixelated dots. So
it was happening earlier, but it seems to be fixed.
Okay, I shut my video back, or shut it off and turn it back on. So this is my first iPad, perhaps connected EdTech SR. Although maybe I did this one other time, but forgot to bring home my backpack and my charging cable today. So we're using borrowed devices. So. And
you're kind of going in and out of pixelation, just to let you know.
Okay. Well, if the audio cuts out, let me know. I can always push the pause button for the family here if need be. Oh, do you know what though? Actually, that reminds me. I bet this will help because my wife's device is on our circle with Disney, and so I need to make her iPad unmanaged. So let's see if that makes a difference, because that means that it'll no longer go through the device for filtering. Ta-da!
There you go.
See if that's better. Okay. So I'm very curious though. What caused you to jump the Apple ship? Because hadn't you been an iPhone user since the beginning?
Well, beginning's a strong word, because the iPhone wasn't available in Montana until 2010. So we didn't have a carrier here that carried an iPhone. You could buy one and hack together a SIM solution that worked. But that's part of what I've been less monogamous to the Apple phone ecosystem, because I was a latecomer to it. And I did carry an iPhone around for, I think it was 3 years before I jumped to Android. And I had a cousin once that was in the regional management of a cell carrier that they managed a lot of stores, and he had a really great line for this that I think is very applicable. He said, in 2000, whatever it was, 13, 14, 15, 16, Android and iOS are functionally the same operating system, right? That they can both do basically the same thing. You won't find a lot of features in one that don't exist in the other. And the way he described it is it's the difference between buying a super high-end sports car that you just admire and maybe shine up once in a while, or buying a 40 or 50-year-old car that's also beautiful, but that you have to kind of tweak and play with all the time. You like to play with the engine, and tweak it as a operating system. And I think that Android and iOS have a similar phenomenon to that. Like, obviously, Apple has the just work phenomenon going for iPhones. I am still stunned about how well those devices work in concert with one another. If you have an iPad and an iPhone and a MacBook, like, they see each other, data magically appears from one or the other. It's a really eloquent ecosystem. But Android does allow you to tweak a lot of things that you don't otherwise aren't really able to tweak in iOS. Now, they've been made a lot of inroads in that. I was interested to see, for example, I reset my iPad a couple of weeks ago because I was having some problems downloading some apps, and so a reset fixed that for me. And what was interesting about that phenomenon was I saw you could finally delete a lot of the Apple apps off of the iPad and go with alternatives.
Can you do that with Maps yet? Does Maps let you?
I think you can, actually.
Oh, that's
So,
great.
well, and that's really good news for those that don't want to be locked into the standard apps. Whereas I think the app developers are oftentimes taking standard apps that come with phones, doing a much better job of developing them to become a more useful tool. And in Android, you can choose everything. Like, everything on Android, the standard is up for debate. So you can download, literally 200 different web browsers and choose one as the default. You can choose from, dozens of GPS apps and one is the default. And that's why I've been very tempted by that. And I can't really explain why, but, I've gone from being 100% Apple to where now, about 85% of my time spent is either a Windows PC, either laptop or desktop or Chromebook. And, I like that because it allows me the opportunity to support others in our organization. We already have another guy who's super into Apple. But yeah, I'm now whatever's in my hands is the best device available, sort of thing.
I'll just say, though, that the AirPlay functionality, again, thinking about schools and a school lens, I mean, it's a game changer. I want every one of our teachers at our school to be able to readily wirelessly send their content to their screen, whether they're using their laptop or their desktop. And I was just today looking at some options for how we could play a little bit with Chromecast,
Right.
and trying to do some of that. But I don't have enough experience with Chromecast to be able to definitively say if it rocks or not. My perception is that it's not manageable at the enterprise level the way that AirPlay is, which is really important with schools and limited bandwidth.
Right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit? You've got the phones are expensive articles. You want to talk a little bit about those, because that's kind of a segue to this topic.
It is. It's really related to this. Samsung has released the Galaxy Note 8, which is a successor to the Galaxy Note 7, which you may remember had all the explosion problems last year. It's a real beast of a phone. It's 6.3 inches. It does have a beautiful display and a lot of high-end features. But they announced today that that particular phone, in different configurations, can be up to $999. And it just so happens that there are rumors that the new iPhone in the fall, which I presume is an iPhone 8, that iPhone 8 the high-end version will also be $1,000. And the reason why that's interesting to me is because that price used to be, in my head, kind of the price of a medium to high-end laptop. But now medium laptops, even new, especially if you're a bargain hunter, can be well below $600 and buy sometimes even a year or two old premium laptop or a relatively recent medium laptop, which I think, for a device that most people are turning over, at least most tech-savvy people are turning over every year to two, $1,000 is just too much for those devices. And now that carrier subsidies have left the U.S. market space and you're paying retail prices for phones, which we could debate whether that's good news or not, I think that's a very high-end price, especially for a device that most people are likely to turn over in 2 to 3 years. So I guess I start with, maybe we can toss this back and forth, Wes. So as an iOS family, is anyone in the market for a $990 phone at the Friar home?
Clearly no. We actually have. I've usually been. I don't know what the right term for this would be. The early adapting one. the parent who says, I need the new device. So I've usually been the one that did, upgrades, and then my wife, and then kids on down with ages. We just have broken with that tradition. My son's phone was not working with GPS, and so we just went ahead and got him a 7. Frankly, I'm hesitant to move off of my phone because I have so much two-step stuff tied to it, and it's kind of a pain to do that. So I don't look forward to that. But no, we are not looking to spend that much money. And, part of the reason we switched to T-Mobile, and I think you guys switched a while back, is that became a viable option in Montana. We were just saving a lot of money over AT&T, and the tethering. Oh my gosh, my work and my professional, blogging and writing and other things require me, or make it so that I really need that tethering feature. And so it just caused pain to no end to have really limited tethering with AT&T when I was with them earlier and then went back to them a little bit. So yeah, I think at some point we're going to plateau, kind of like we are at laptops now, where when you look at the basic functionality that teachers need, we didn't do this. It's going to be harder when you're used to a full-blown Mac to go down to a Chromebook if you haven't had laptops. Or let's mention names. Oklahoma City Public Schools has had pretty crummy Windows laptops in the hands of their teachers for years, and it's just astounding how slow they are and how poorly functional they are. A new Chromebook with 4 gigs of RAM is going to seem like a rocket ship in many cases. And so it depends on your context, but I really think we're reaching a plateau with laptops as far as performance. Most of what teachers are going to need to do is probably going to be met by a Chromebook. And I would suspect we might get there with phones. But to your point about the continuity features, I mean, that's, what Apple is trying to do, is to really differentiate themselves and want you to be part of that whole ecosystem. And AirPlay is one of the biggest game changers. So I guess I need to dabble more and talk to other IT folks and people that are supporting, Chrome and Android, and see how that's going in school. I would guess that Google is going to want to step up to that, right? Because with the Chromebook, they want to have a robust capability for students and teachers to share content, and I'm sure they're not ignoring that with AirPlay. But as of yet, there hasn't been a great delivering cross-platform, Miracast, these other things. They all kind of suck, compared to the iPhone.
To AirPlay. Yeah. Well, and the one thing there that's also critical is that solving the enterprise problem for AirPlay, which wasn't always the case early on. AirPlay was a pretty big mess in enterprise computing, which means that if you plugged in an Apple TV into your network and were able to connect wirelessly via your iPad, your MacBook, or your iPhone, it oftentimes couldn't see the AirPlay devices. And they've done a lot of work in the last, particularly 24 months, to make that an elegant feature. And Chromecast is getting there. I think there are ways to install them enterprise-wide. But the bottom line is that those are the features that should work really well, and they're like, even when you buy a high-end projector that has a wireless a component to it. The one I have used the most, I've taught in classrooms before that use Epson high-end projectors that have a wireless app you can download and broadcast to it. It's still pretty wonky and not super great. And so those are examples of features that now that AirPlay is a little more consistent and is able to be rolled out in an enterprise environment. That's pretty great. I would also add that the release today of the Galaxy Note 8 is super interesting. $1,000 is I believe $900 is the starting price, and then they work their way up from there. And I'm assuming things like the amount of storage space on the phone is probably the differentiator. But the bottom line is that if phones are going to be twice the price of middle end laptops, I think cheaper phones will almost certainly become, something to compete with.
And isn't it interesting in the developing world, right? I mean, if we were to be in India or China or many other places, this is not reality. It strikes me it's a little bit like the way that loans underwrite the auto industry, right? How many people can afford to go out and just purchase out of pocket a brand new vehicle? Most folks can't, so they're going to finance the car or lease or whatever. And, that's the route we've taken with phones. And the industry is shifting in terms of, I mean, you can buy them outright, et cetera, but it's just loans and being able to buy on credit, I think, plays a big role into this. And so,
Right.
there'll be an opportunity, and maybe it's there today to say, hey, I don't have to have that latest phone. And if you wait a couple years, it's probably pretty remarkable, what you can get. In fact, Jason, well, I still haven't decided. You think I ought to go to Egypt in November? I've been invited to go to Cairo to present. There's no honorarium, of course, but I'm honored to be included. Anyway, yeah, whether I would go there or not, anytime I travel internationally, I'm going to take seriously the things we've been discussing about customs and folks sucking information off of your phone, and probably travel with a burner phone. So.
Well, and the great thing about phones becoming expensive is there is a great both aftermarket for phones now. There are places that will take phones and buy them off you used, refurbish them, resell them again. Gazelle.com is the place I would go for that. They buy old phones and they then flip them.
Well, Walmart has places where and even our mall too, where you just put your phone in, right? And then you can get your credit.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's a
That's
vending
awesome.
machine trade-in. Isn't that just crazy?
Yep, that's really great. And then I've mentioned these a couple of times in terms of the show, but Amazon sells Amazon Prime phones, which they have 4 or 5 different models that you can get. Sometimes a substantial savings. The one I purchased, it was $50 less with Amazon features on it, which means that there's an ad on the lock screen, which I don't find particularly offensive. And for $50, I don't, at least. And that's a premium phone ish for $170 that works on all 4 carriers. That's unlocked, and I've been able to move it from carrier to carrier without issue. And I guess that's the good news is that unlike a few years ago where the kind of secondary phone market beyond the premium phones they were pretty terrible phones, there's now a lot of great options. So I guess if you're looking for the bright side of the $1,000 phone, is that the $200 phone and the used $150 phone. This Galaxy Note 4 was a $700 purchase if you bought it new, unlocked in 2014, as I think when it was released, maybe early 2015. But the bottom line is that this phone cost me $140 on eBay, and it's worked great. I bought a new case for it and called it good. So it's an interesting piece, and obviously these markets are going to have to figure out a way to shake it out.
So there's a couple things I hope we'll get to. We're about halfway through the show. We haven't mentioned, number one, shout out to Peggy George in our chat room. Glad to have you with us as always, Peggy. And also that you can get all the links, including others we will probably not talk about, on edtechsr.com/links. I hope to get to some militarization of computation articles that relate to Cyber Command and killer robots and some things like that. But first, I want to talk about this article from Open Culture on August 5th, which I think we have maintained in our show notes, for more than any other article. Probably we've had this on there for 3 weeks. But the article is called "How Information Overload Robs Us of Our Creativity: What the Scientific Research Shows." So, Jason, I think you've talked several times about acknowledging interruption and the role that interruption, notifications, things like that, play. Has that changed your workflow and how you get into a project and the ways in which you open yourself up for either interruption, distraction? What does that look like for you?
It has, and part of it for me, and I mentioned last week the Pomodoro technique, which actually I got some interesting people back channeling me on Twitter about that after we had mentioned it on the show, and then Wes, you had posted a couple links about it. Pomodoro technique is about trying to find a way to sustain a chunk of time where you're concentrating and then giving yourself a brief break and then jumping back into that again, and it's 25 on, 5 off for 5 cycles, and then you get a full 20-minute break before you jump back into it again. And at work, what I do is my 5-minute break is actually a swing through the hallway. So I take some steps, I try to get my blood pumping, and I can concentrate back into it until my timer goes off again. And I found that both at work and then when I'm at home working on a project, it is a great way to keep me kind of sustained for a while. That gives me the opportunity to take a break if I really want it. And so part of that is turning things off, like the notifications on my phone. I've spoken on this issue to a number of teachers now, and I'm very convinced by the research which says that notifications are And the cell phone itself are both, can be very disruptive to the kind of thinking, creativity, and focused effort that you take to get things done. And then I'd be convinced for younger folks that are in the learning environment, really for learning. So I've taken this very seriously, and I am interested anytime there is a perception that research is confirming what I think to be true, and a lot of people would also argue that cell phones are great, but if they become distraction machines, you have to take control yourself as a tech-savvy user and do something about that.
Absolutely. I'm not modeling great self-care and mindfulness and all those kinds of things at this time of the year. I will say, though, that I had a birthday on Sunday, and my wife's gift was some yoga. And boy, that was great. And we have talked about doing that, and I really need that. And I think part of what should define folks who are wanting to be very aware of the roles and impacts of technology, is going to be some marked differences than perhaps the behaviors that you might just see from people just getting a phone and not changing settings and just kind of using it, quote unquote, naturally, or the way that it might seem to be. Of course I need to check this all the time and use this all the time. So I'm trying to be a little bit more mindful about how quickly I'm looking at the phone and what I'm looking at, and how it affects you, right? Because our brains are amazing things, and we are becoming cyborgs. We've talked about this on the show before, and we are changing. I think our brains are changing, and I think we're going to just I think we had an article last show or a couple shows ago where somebody was talking about these dramatic changes that we're going to see in humanity as a result of augmentation through technology, through different ways that's happening. So anyway, I think I'm going to take a look at that. How do you pronounce it? Pomodoro effect?
The Pomodoro technique.
Yeah, and if people want to look that up, that was last show, episode 61, if you want to go back to those links.
And I give one other shout out related to that. On September 1st, I think is the day. No, I'm sorry, September 5th. Manoush Zomorodi, who we've given a couple shout outs to here on the podcast. She's the host of WNYC's podcast, Note to Self, formerly known as New Tech City. And I'm a weekly listener. I believe that Wes is an often weekly listener as well. And it's kind of a society and tech podcast. And over a year ago, she utilized a project called the Bored and Brilliant Project, which was that she wanted us to be more mindful about the way our phones interact, the way we interact with phones. And then the upside of that was that that the research that is cited in the articles we're talking about tonight, that if with constant distraction and constant information available to us, not being bored means that we're lacking some creativity, that we oftentimes deny ourselves the kind of creative time that boredom brings to us. And that book is going to be out on September 5th. And so I have purchased the pre-purchase of it, so it will come right to my Kindle when it shows up there. But I'll put the link in the show notes. I'm really excited to read about that, because that's where I started thinking about this a lot, was based on Ms. Zomorodi's really excellent podcast series related to distraction in tech. And so I am looking forward to reading that book, and I think it's a great resource if you'd like to think about this issue.
Excellent. And if I could suggest an article that segues to that a bit, when they talk about, distraction and social media and the ways in which app developers want us to, to spend more and more time. How about this Jon Snow article, Facebook, A Threat to Democracy, BBC, August 24th? Want to comment on that?
I do. A really great article. The article is related to the notion that the shareable world that we live in is creating it's essentially making the fake news problem that much worse. That fake news wouldn't be as much of a problem if it wasn't being initially shared and then amplified dramatically by social media platforms. And it kind of goes back to the fact that we've introduced this shockingly effective way to stay connected in the world, and yet we haven't developed norms yet or rules, and maybe it's about laws too, but we're not really treating these tools in, I think, an ethically sustainable way. That we've got so much power now to amplify our views or others' views, exponentially via the internet, and social networking tools allow you to become extra potent in that particular regard, right? Because you can take your view or others' views and spread them rather quickly. And what I think this article does a good job of discussing is that that's a real problem for us, particularly in Western style democracies, because the bottom line, really bad misinformation is now easily spreadable to the masses with almost no tools available beyond your gumption and research to be able to delineate between the two. So I guess I'd start with, and we've talked about the fake news problem before, but Wes, we're both very heavy social media users. It's mostly in terms of personal connections on Facebook, and I think we both use Twitter a lot in regards to your professional connections with folks. But where's the balance at between these two? I mean, where do we balance the obviously massive effect positively of these tools with the fact that they can be utilized to spread misinformation as much as they are to spread good, positive information?
I think there's an important role for the companies to step up to, Twitter and Facebook and these social media companies. I think we talked in the show last week about this idea of not just being a common carrier. There's this idea in US FCC legislation that if you are a carrier of a phone service, you're just carrying the line, you're just transmitting it. And you have to be careful in this, right? Because, filtering is censorship. And at some level, values and things that people disagree with enter into this, because, not everybody is going to be upset by let's say, neo-Nazi hate speech. Actually, the pastor at our church wrote an editorial in the Edmond paper. Edmond's a suburb to the north, and that's where we still go to church. And it was a pretty balanced piece, and it was basically saying, I think, let's not just rush out there and condemn and judge. And it was trying to encourage us to listen to each other. But there was a person on Facebook who was, I guess, a friend of his, but pretty upset at him not just condemning the Nazis and let's just condemn them. And so, this stuff is really contentious, but I'm very glad to see that Facebook as well as Twitter, since the election, have stepped up more, at least rhetorically, to acknowledging a responsibility to not just let anything get shared, anything be advertised. They have responsibilities. And of course, it's a hidden algorithm, right? We don't have the open source algorithm to look at to see how are they populating our news feed. Twitter is now not just showing you what's live when you go into your feed, but you can do some things, I think, turning things on and off, but generally most users are going to see things that are algorithmically moved up higher in the feed when you haven't been on for a while, which might be beneficial and helpful to you. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there definitely is a responsibility that companies have to not just be a common carrier and say, well, that's just what we're, letting people transmit. I'm reminded of Rwanda, right? We had the Rwandan genocide, I don't know how many years ago, but there, and I'll have to go look at IMDb for the movies. I've seen some pretty good movies about that and read some things about that. The radio station was huge, fanning the flames of people's anger. It was the Tutsis and the Hutus, I think, are the two tribes, and just horrific, what happened there. But the role of media was really, really important. And the role of the media is gigantic here as well. So I think that when we talk about ethics and we talk about the need for students to take the EdTech Situation Room spin to schools, we need for students to be thinking about the ethical implications of these kinds of things. Students that we have in school today are not only going to be developers, they're going to be executives, they're going to be responsible decision makers in different kinds of organizations. And I think we want them to step up to responsibilities. I guess we could couch it in terms of citizenship, right? If we're citizens, if we're members of this, community, whether it's our local, community, our state, our nation, our world, we have rights and responsibilities. And I think the corporate, we all do, right? It's not just let's put it on Facebook and Twitter, but
Right.
we as individuals have responsibilities for what we share and we don't share. That means trying to vet the things that we're sharing. But I totally agree with you that we haven't worked this out. We're in early days with this, and while I'm a really big advocate for empowering voices, it's I don't know that I anticipated, who did, right, that such outlier voices would gain such volume and such influence, especially over the political process in Europe and the United States.
Yep.
Have you been surprised by what's happened with social media in the last year, Jason?
I am, if for no other reason than it feels like that it makes people like you and me feel like kind of like e-hippies, right? Like that we obviously think that these are extremely powerful tools and they connect people, and by providing everyone a voice, that's very democratizing, right? But the bottom line is that not everyone holds views that are palatable to the general public, and by giving everyone a microphone, that comes with implications that we're not necessarily ready for. And I kind of think about it in terms of newspaper commenting, right? Obviously, there is, and I think I mentioned this in the past, there's something called the online disinhibition effect, which is the notion that when you perceive that you're anonymous or you're otherwise not able to be known by others and you can't see reactions face to face, that creates almost an enhanced onus to express very aggressive opinions, no matter what the content politically are. That's helped. What explains why newspaper commenting sections are so kind of terrible places to be. But the super bottom line is that we all believe, I think, that these technologies are powerful and effective. But power, well, with great power comes great responsibility. And so, talking about ethics, seeing things in terms of what these tools can and can't do is an important part of this process. So, we talk a lot about you should be teaching more about things like ethical use of technology in schools. This is a primary example of where these lessons are so important.
Absolutely. And I think that the role that empathy plays in all of this is really
Yes.
key too, right? Because that's one of the missing pieces. I had a shout out last week to an article, which was a not safe for work article, which I'm not often sharing. But it was this analysis. And I think you've got an article about trolls too, which may be a segue to it. But it was trying to understand the outbreak of troll culture. And part of what the article was saying was that we may have a generation of folks with little empathy for others, and the role in which technology has played in allowing folks to maybe not socialize and not see people face to face is playing into that. So how about the troll article?
Well,
this was what was that, from Rico?
Yeah, the troll article is interesting only because it shows where, it gives a physical location to where most trolling commenters come from, and it does go through a state-by-state analysis, and it's probably more visual eye candy than it is anything else. It's interesting to look at, good clickbait style headlines, so it's an interesting place to go. But the bottom line is that there's a regional bend to being an internet troll, and so I would make no comment related to that based on particular parts of the country. But yeah, there definitely is an interesting differential. I am pretty happy to report that Montana seems to be pretty light on the whole trolling phenomenon, and in fact, I would commend Oklahoma, sir, that we're light on the trolling phenomenon, and Oklahoma's even less than Montana. So we come from kind states, is the way I'll state it, at risk of offending 48 other states' viewers. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting map of where a lot of the trolls come from. And apparently Vermont is like troll central. It is one of the highest troll rates in the United States. 12.2% of comments from Vermont are hostile.
Wow, what an interesting analysis that would be for students to try to take that up. And one of the little things in this, what what are the kinds of things we should have our kids doing? Working with data and doing analyses that involves, multiple variables and looking at correlations. I mean, certainly in high school and college, we need to be doing that. And so be interesting to see all the things that are correlated to that map, right? Like what else is correlated? Like maybe the digital divide is correlated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Oklahoma has a lot of folks who are not as connected. Maybe Vermont is one of the most connected cities. When I was up there with my wife at the beginning of this month, they were bragging about gigabit city. I think as far as being able to provide gigabit internet to the home, that's way more bandwidth than we're enjoying currently. So anyway, there's a little educational spin on that. I mean, I love maps. I think it's very compelling, the complexity and the kinds of things that can be conveyed with a map. But at the same time, Jason's approaching his defense of his dissertation. I've had that pleasurable experience myself. I think part of what you emerge from having gone through a doctoral program is looking at research and trying to encourage people not to rush to judgment. There's a correlation. That doesn't necessarily mean causality. Very difficult thing to establish in terms of, educational research particularly. So, but that's a great map, and that could be a great writing prompt and a great discussion topic to talk about some really important stuff in terms of, I think there's probably a lot of people unaware of the dynamics that are happening with trolls and trolling. And I would bet there are a number of teens who have experienced that at some level, or just that nastiness, may not have any idea about that. So there's a good digital citizenship parenting angle to this as well, to say,
Right.
Talk about this with your kids, talk about this with your students.
Yep, absolutely so.
Hey, could I take us to this, the militarization stuff? It looks like
Please do.
Okay, so I put these on the show notes under a category, and sometimes we usually do this on the Google Doc, and I put this under militarization of computation. And so I'll just kind of hit a few of these, and then we'll get the official Jason Neiffer responses. First one is an interesting article. I don't know if you realize this, but we've had 4 U.S. Navy ships in like the last 2 months that have had pretty significant collisions. I think the one before the McCain, the Fitzgerald, weren't there like 11 sailors maybe killed?
Yep.
I mean, it's a pretty big deal. And so someone had mentioned the other day to me, I wonder if it was hacked. I wonder if these are getting hacked. And so this is an article from the Council on Foreign Relations, August 23rd, a cyber norms hypothetical. What if the USS John S. McCain was hacked? And they open this by saying, basically the studies and the inquiries that they've done have shown, poor seamanship, other kinds of factors. In fact, not having as much time maybe at sea and behind simulators or behind the wheel. I don't know. There's interesting technology things like this, how maybe the Navy, just like with pilots, and this is true of commercial pilots too, a lot of times there's really not nearly the amount of landings and things like that they need to have real world before they're, stepping up and flying people around. But that points to, what is going to be on people's mind in all kinds of circumstances now, whether it's an election or it's some kind of an accident. Like, what role did cyber operations play in that? Was it at play? And so I commend that article. And then the next one is from Cyberscoop. So we've gone from very credible to never heard of them before. Trump orders U.S. Cyber Command receive new authority to conduct cyber warfare. And by the way, Jason, as a debater, I think you'll appreciate that the article before goes into the law of the sea and international law. I remember when I was a senior in high school, we had a guy who's a fairly strange dude, and his whole case was on law of the sea. And we're like, what is that? But Anyway, it's pretty interesting about the corridors of open travel and, territorial waters and all this stuff. Okay, so this is a pretty big deal that Trump has ordered the elevation of Cyber Command to be its own independent command in the United States military structure. Currently, it's under the National Security Agency. And so I think this is just a further evidence, a sign of the times, if you will, of the importance of cyber, the importance of technology on our lives, and the ways in which governments, as well as all other institutions, are needing to face this and elevate the importance that they're putting on this. I think or no, I think it was last week that we had an article talking about whether or not companies should be allowed to hack back. And that was the Atlantic on July 14th, 2017. When companies get hacked, should they be allowed to hack back? I mean, there's really, interesting and important elements to all this in terms of international law, in terms of, defining new norms. Back to that first article on the naval ships, it said, if there was a kinetic event, if people were killed, they were injured, equipment was harmed, then, that could constitute something that self-defense could be, invoked, and and under international law, folks could be held criminally liable for things that they've done, if those things, lead to kinetic, meaning, actual physical harm that's being done to people or property. So connecting to that as well, on my birthday, August 20th, Elon Musk led 116 experts at the United Nations in an open letter calling for an outright ban of killer robots. And this was from The Guardian. And it's interesting because I put a link to this. When I was teaching STEM in UConn, I love to do curiosity links with kids to get them talking and thinking and just, seeing sort of current events with technology. And in 2015, we were talking about this United Nations convention that was going on, international convention, looking at whether or not robots should have the ability to autonomously kill. And some of my students recorded a little 3-minute video, talking about this and the sort of the pros and the cons. It's pretty fascinating, and some of the quotes from this article are talking about how this isn't science fiction, this isn't the future, this is today. Quote, lethal autonomous weapons are already in use. Samsung's SGR-A1 Sentry gun, which is reportedly technically capable of firing autonomously, but is disputed whether it's deployed as such, is used along the South Korean border of the 2.5-mile wide Korean demilitarized zone. Quote, unlike potential manifestations of AI, which still remain in the realm of science fiction, autonomous weapon systems are on the cusp of development right now and have a very real potential to cause significant harm to innocent people along with global instability. And it really is a fairly dystopian vision. So, Jason, where do you stand? Do you think Elon Musk is on the right side here, or do we just need to embrace the military-industrial complex, hold them close and say, take us into the future and let the clone army fight our battles?
I think the biggest problem we're running into is that in the same way that we're having problems adjusting to, instant information 24/7, right? It's disrupting sleep patterns, it's disrupting social patterns, yada, yada, yada. We're not really we have a real sense of where this is going to go, right? We have a lot of science fiction related to this that seems to be super scary, and Skynet, bearing down on us and yada, yada, yada. But I do think that a ban first, create meaningful rules later is a pretty reasonable response, because I just don't know we just don't know where this is going to go, right? Like I keep thinking to myself, my cell phone's amazing, but if I'd put this in my hand, in 20 years ago, even, or let's go 30 years ago, and said that this is going to be my thing, right? Like, this is going to be available to me. Every song ever is available on my phone. Videos, all movies of all time is available on my phone. That kind of goes around with me. I would have been blown away by that. And so, the fact that the future's now means that we have to take more proactive steps. And it's funny you should mention Law of the Sea. I've cut Law of the Sea cards before, so I'm familiar with the phenomenon. But that's actually a useful analog here to the internet as well. The part of the reason why the Law of the Sea became necessary at some point was because we thought the sea was infinite and that we would never really run into each other. It's part of the reason why in 2017 some people are shocked that we're running out of seafood, is because we're overfishing the oceans because we never thought that we'd get to the point where we did. Well, the network, the internet, digital devices, we're kind of in the same position right now where it seems like that there's infinite amount of space for things to develop and grow, but at some point we're going to run into the kind of natural reality externalities of that. And so if we can be proactive now about, I hate bans for bans' sake, right? I hate bans that they don't come with much thought. But until we have a sense of where things are going, a ban in this context is probably a good start to a long-term conversation about where these fit inside of our world. It's terrifying to me, a robot war, right? But if robot wars are fought nowhere near humans, right, maybe like in outer space to where that's away from where there's no human damage, a robot war might be more interesting than where humans are involved in that process. And, there's 1,000 science fiction writers will tell me why I'm an idiot for saying that. But, these discussions have to be had. So if the band gets the ball rolling on the discussion, then so be it.
And I think that it's really, really good to be educated about these kinds of issues, very contemporary and very important, right? World War I, and there's a history of this happening in warfare. The mini ball in the Civil War had more lethality than the generals that graduated West Point, and this is why Pickett's charge was, so crazily horrific in terms of damage. World War I, trench warfare, right? The machine gun. I mean, we weren't ready for the level of lethality. In this article, they said a couple things that were sort of thought-provoking for me. Number one, that the two previous revolutions in weapons and warfare was number one, gunpowder, number two, nuclear weapons. And they're saying that autonomous weapons, have the potential in a very bad way to be the third revolution. The other thing they talked about were banned weapons, chemical weapons being one. And then the other, like blinding weapons, creating weapons that immediately blind people. Like that's banned by the United Nations. And I would say that it's important for us to talk about. We've mentioned the law of the sea tonight, which is interesting. And we, talk international law. Like we need to be talking about the importance of these things as citizens. We've had some rhetoric actually close to you, Peggy. They're down in Phoenix recently with a certain elected official who is, talking about, a very protectionist and inward looking focus. And I believe we do not need to step back into the past. I think, it's my wife's a big Star Trek fan. When are we going to move forward into a much more enlightened age where we're taking care of people to a much greater degree and we are, thinking about how we're internationally collaborating. And so I think there's a role in schools to be talking about these kind of things and thinking about citizenship. Fortunately, when I was born and Jason too, and we've lived, we didn't experience any of the world wars. In fact, I was born, when Vietnam was drawing to a close. And the fact that now with the way that we wage war in the United States, we have an all volunteer force, it's not a mercenary force, but, in some ways we are bribing a lot of young people with the promise of college money and income, to go fight these wars for us. And if we don't have somebody who's related to us or a neighbor or whatever, we just may not realize the cost that's being borne by many folks, including 4,000 more that are going to head back to Afghanistan. So important stuff to talk about, important technology connections to make. And I would say just connections to bigger things that are, already important in our curriculum, like citizenship and drawing in some things that people may or may not be aware of. So, Jason, I am afraid we have talked past the top of the hour already. I do not know how this happened so quickly.
It seems to happen quicker every week. So, shall we Geek of the Week it?
Sounds good. I'll go first. I had a very wonderful conversation with some of our high school history teachers this last week, and I thought we were just going to talk Apple TV, and they ended up asking me all about other ideas for technology integration and projects. One of the things we talked about was ways that students can interact around text, and that teachers can have greater visibility into the thinking of students and what kinds of tools are available. And so I put a link up in the show notes. I'd sent a couple tweets out, and one of these was a result of that. This is from EdSurge on June 27th, The Power of Nonprofit Acquisitions, Curriculate Rises from the Dead. There have been two products that I've been familiar with. The first being Subtext, which was purchased by Renaissance Learning and has basically been killed, which is a wonderful iPad app that allowed you to read books together, see what each other was highlighting, have comments right inside the text. And the other one that's been like that is Curriculate, which was started by actually the son of one of our librarians here in Oklahoma up in Enid, but was not able to turn a profit. And so this nonprofit group has taken it over. So that is a tool to look at. But my Geek of the Week is called Hypothesis. And Hypothesis is a collaborative web annotation tool similar to what Digo would let you do, but allowing you to create groups to use tags. And so I've actually started on one of those articles about the Elon Musk calling for the ban of killer robots. I went ahead and did some public annotations in Hypothesis, and I tagged those EdTech SR. And I'm going to play with that here in the next coming week and kind of see how that works, both because I want to do that myself and then also find out for my teachers. But shout out to Dog Tracks, Kevin Hodgson, who was the one who shared that on Twitter, and would love to have any feedback if anybody's playing with interactive web annotation, article annotation, ebook annotation tools, especially with students. Would love to hear more about that. But Hypothesis looks like a pretty promising open platform for doing that.
Yeah, just looking at it myself, what a great to do that. It took me 2 seconds to figure it out, and nice app. So great share. Thanks, Wes. So I'd like to extend on something that I talked about a couple of weeks ago. I've been listening to the new McAfee podcast called Hack, which is a really great security podcast. And one of the things that I've been doing religiously for at least 4 or 5 years that I'm now starting to talk to more people about due to the real risks that exist is how to be safe in public Wi-Fi. We obviously live in a very prolific public Wi-Fi environment. There's hotspots available in lots of different locations now, but a lot of people, even very tech-savvy users, don't know the kinds of I guess, strategies you can utilize in order to secure yourself appropriately on those public Wi-Fi spaces. And so I'm sharing a really great article from August 16th from PC Magazine called 14 Tips for Public Wi-Fi Hotspot Security. And it details the kind of strategies you want to take now in order to make yourself a little safer in public Wi-Fi environments. It's somewhat about picking the right Wi-Fi networks, not clicking on things that you don't know for sure are intended for you to be on, how to avoid what's sometimes called man-in-the-middle attacks, and how to be kind of smart, safe, and savvy as a user. And so great article from PC Magazine, 14 tips on how to secure yourself in public Wi-Fi. And of course, everyone, let's be safe out there.
And thank you, Jason, for recommending that McAfee podcast. I did listen to that after the show, and fantastic. It just definitely makes you more aware of what can be done, makes me want to delete many of the common Wi-Fi SSIDs or network IDs that I have saved, because that's one of the quickest ways that people do it. And they do that in that show is, they pick a network ID that a lot of people will automatically join. And so think about whether or not you want your device to automatically join, and also think about how many you want to save, because there's a lot of bad guys out there, folks. We don't want them to get you. So
true. Okay, Wes, tell us where we can find you on the internet.
Well, I am still at speedofcreativity.org, and I'm W. Fryer on Twitter, and I am going to hopefully be making a few updates to some books. That is one of my fall goals, but I've got to be doing some time shifting to do that. So yeah, Playing with Media 2011, right? Who was doing that in 2011? We need an update.
Yep, here. And by the way, great textbook that I actually used in context of a pre-service teacher class at the University of Montana, so I'm applauding the updates. My name is Jason Neiffer, and you can find me on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach, and I blog at the Northwest Council for Computer Education Tech Savvy Teacher blog, blog.ncc.org. And this is the EdTech Situation Room, and we're here usually on Wednesday nights, but occasionally we shake things up to keep things interesting at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central Time. We do broadcast live, so keep an eye on our Twitter feed. EdTech SR is where you can find us on Twitter. And every article we refer to in the EdTech Situation Room is available on our link page at our website, edtechsr.com. And even if we don't get to an article, or if you want to read more deeply about one of the articles we refer to, that's the place to go to get more information. So we wish you a great week whenever you happen to be listening to this, and you can join us next week on Wednesday for the next edition of EdTech Situation Room. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.